Thanks, Ron. I want to talk about childhood poverty and its consequences both for children and for children's eventual life chances as adults. And I want to tie the policy aspects of this to the opening sessions on SES. I think when most of us think of SES, we think of it as an unchanging condition across children's childhoods. And we think of interventions in response to the SES gradient to be not changing SES, not thinking of interventions that might actually change family SES, but rather the kinds of programs that we just heard about, the parenting programs, the early childhood education programs, health programs, and so forth. So I want to try to get people to be thinking about SES in a much more dynamic framework than I think most people do. And in thinking about policy, there is no policy to change SES. There are policies to change components of SES. We have income support policies that change that component of SES. We have training programs, schooling programs that change that component of SES. We have job training programs that change the occupational component of SES. If you look across childhood, what you see in these components is that each of them are fairly dynamic. Income is changing a lot from one year to the next. This is something that we've known for 40 years. If you categorize kids according to their income between the prenatal year and age 2, and look at kids who are very low income, under $15,000 a year, only about half are under $15,000 between ages 3 and 5, only half between ages 6 and 15. We know that in the United States, at least, that education levels, especially among women with relatively low education levels, change quite a bit across their 30s. So SES should really be thought about not as a monolithic concept, but as components. And in thinking about policy, we should certainly put on the table the kind of interventions that we've just heard about. But at the same time, I would argue we want to put on the table SES interventions, in particular income interventions. So that's going to be the point of my talk today. Every year, the Census Bureau goes out and counts the number of poor children there are in the United States. Poverty is defined in the United States as having a family income for a family of 3 that's under $17,000 a year. For a family of 4, it's about $22,000. So when the Census Bureau went out last spring and counted the number of poor in 2010, they found that for children under age 6 in the United States, 25%, 5.3 million kids, lived in families with incomes that were as low as I just mentioned, below $17,000 for a family of 3, below $22,000 for a family of 4. Huge number. It's gone up, obviously, with the recessions. The shaded areas here are the recessions. And my interest is in policies that might be adopted to change the economic component of SES, and then to ask what impact that might have. Here's another slide from the census data. If you look to see to what extent families are brought out of poverty by different programs, one of the most prominent for working families is the Earned Income Tax Credit, which we spend about $45 billion a year on. It pays up to $5,100 per year to working families, depending on their family size and depending on their earned income. The United States has never bought into a child allowance kind of scheme with unconditioned payments to families, but rather has geared its income support policies toward incentivizing work, and it's put quite a bit of money into this. So the $45 billion that have gone into the EITC are sufficient, if you look at the income distribution figures, to bring about 1 million children out of poverty. Right? So it's a remarkable SES intervention. And the question is, so what? Can we really expect an income intervention that's altering SES to have benefits for kids both in the short run and in the long run. There have been a number of interesting studies looking at short-run impacts of changes in income. Here are a couple that are geared to this Earned Income Tax Credit program that I mentioned. The Earned Income Tax Credit program began with the Reagan administration on a very small scale. Under Clinton, with welfare reform, it expanded very dramatically and became much more generous. So we have the possibility in the mid-1990s of comparing children and families before and after the expansion of the Earned Income Tax Credit. It turns out the expansion was somewhat differential depending on family size, so you can do this kind of natural experiment of comparing changes in test scores for kids and changes in health of mothers that might be differential for families with 2 or more kids versus 1 child, for moms who are likely to be eligible for the EITC. So it's not a pure experimental design, but it's a nice quasi-experimental design. And one paper looks at children's achievement, and what you find is that this expansion of several $1,000s in the 1990s was associated with about a 1/5 of a standard deviation increase in test scores, both math and reading scores. There was a separate study that looked at maternal stress by linking information from the health interview surveys before and after the expansion, again differential for depending on family size for women likely to be eligible for the ITC. And what they found was a number of indicators of reduction in stress because of this increased generosity of the EITC. They found this both in biomarkers, C-reactive protein levels being above threshold declined, and self-reports of mental health, bad mental health days declined as well. So it's interesting kind of quasi-experimental evidence that there might be short-run impacts both affecting kids and affecting mothers in ways that might play out through parenting to benefit kids as well. But what about longer-run effects? And here we can talk about specificity of poverty in early childhood and link it with a nice data set to how kids turn out when they become adults. So the data here are coming from a longitudinal study, panel study of income dynamics, which has followed a nationally representative sample of kids from the late 60s all the way to the present day. So you've got several birth cohorts of kids who are observed, whose parents are observed in the prenatal year, the birth year, every single year of childhood. And those kids grow up, leave home, and they are interviewed when they're in adulthood. And I'm focusing here on interviews taken when those kids are adults between ages of 30 and 41. Here's an analysis that was published last year using these data. And the analysis here took the log of annual earnings between ages 30 and 41, or average work hours, annual work hours between ages 30 and 41, and tried to assess to what extent very early life income seemed to have the strongest association with these adult measures of productivity. So the analysis had these outcomes, earnings or work hours, as dependent variables. There were a lot of control variables, education level, family structure, test score of the parents, and so forth. But also there were measures, very high quality measures of average income between the prenatal year and age 2, average income between ages 3 and 5, and average income between ages 6 and 15. All right? So we're trying to look at the association between income and childhood, in particular early childhood, controlling for income later in childhood, as well as these demographic conditions. So again, it's not an experiment, but it's a very heavily controlled test to try to see whether the associations with early income and these adult outcomes are particularly important. And they turned out to be. So if you look at the first set of bars, these are the effect sizes that were estimated we've scaled it here, a $5,000 per year increase. So every $5,000 increase for low-income families is associated with about an 8%, this is between the prenatal year and age 2, an 8% increase in earnings between ages 30 and 40. So if you think about that over the 4 years of prenatal year, birth year, age 1, age 2, that's about a 30% increase in earnings during that period. And in contrast to the statistically significant effect of early income, there was an insignificant association with income later in childhood, either ages 3 to 5 or 6 to 15. If you try to break up 6 to 15 further, there's no action at all. Now, that's a very important result. If you think about, we've talked about health as an outcome, but if you're talking to someone who happens to be from Arizona, and try to make a connection to what's important for the average person, knowing what affects adult productivity is absolutely vital, because having a productive labor force 20 years from now or 30 years from now is going to contribute to the growth rate of the economy, and even small differences in the growth rate of the economy are going to go a long way in solving the deficit problems, and it goes on and on. So there are very substantial benefits if you can link childhood conditions to these adult productivity measures. It turns out if the data aren't good at looking at childhood pathways, but you can try to figure out why these earnings effects exist. It doesn't seem to be a behavior pathway. If you look at early income, potentially linking to crime, arrests, incarceration, out-of-wedlock childbearing, there's no unique role for early childhood income for those kind of demographic events. Even if you look at schooling, schooling is completed schooling it has a significant association, but only up to about age 20 or so. There's so much additional schooling that low-income mothers get in the 30s that's unrelated to early income. That doesn't seem to be the pathway. The big thing is work hours, variation in work hours. It's people's ability to sustain full-time work. It shows up both for men and women. And that gets us into the new part of the analysis that we've just completed, and that is health, right? Can you think about health pathways that might be affected by economic deprivation in very early childhood that would in turn impair people's ability to sustain full-time work and produce lower earnings? And in the paper we concentrate on the immune pathways. People have talked about that already. Again, this isn't a health study, but there are measures between ages 30 and 41, again, of self-reports of arthritis and self-reports of hypertension, both related to immune function pathways. If you just look at the prevalence, what fraction of interviews that people were providing between ages 30 and 41 had reports of arthritis. It's about 10% among kids whose very early income was low, defined here as under $25,000 a year on average. And in contrast, higher income kids ended up with rates of arthritis that are about half as large. Hypertension, again, about a 2-to-1 ratio, but here it's almost 20% of kids whose family income was very low in early childhood end up reporting hypertension. So that's the prevalence. What about the impacts? To what extent can we really associate very early income with these adult conditions? And here we do the same kind of analysis as before. We have, instead of earnings and work hours, we have the fraction of time that people were reporting arthritis between ages 30 and 41, the fraction of time people were reporting hypertension, and you get the same kind of pattern, that it's income in the prenatal, birth year, first year, and second year of life that has statistically significant associations with these conditions, and incomes later in childhood don't. So it seems that there may indeed be a health pathway that's linking to earnings. And if you try to account for the earnings effect, you get about 20–25% of that earnings effect that you can account for with these conditions. So in summary, we've seen in this work and in the past work that this early income period seems to be particularly important for important outcomes in adulthood, earnings, work hours, and now these immune-mediated diseases. And I think when we think about interventions, we can think about parenting interventions, we can think about early childhood education interventions, but we should put economic and SES-related interventions on the table at the same time. Thank you.